Response handling. So here we're going to learn how we can produce a response. There are two different schemes of generating responses using JAX.S. The first scheme is using what is called a built-in entity provider or content handler. So here and then we're going to actually see how we can create response using response builder class. Okay, so there are two different ways, and you have already seen two different ways of creating responses in the previous examples. We're going to actually see how we can use the XML content handler using JAX-B, and then we're going to see how we can actually generate a JSON as well. There is what is called the JAX-B element class that we can use, and we'll see when you want to use the JAX-B element class. And then we're going to see how what is the proper way of responding when create operation is performed. Basically, you have to do two things. One is to send back 201 created HTTP response, and also you want to set a location response header with newly created items URI. Okay, so that is the behavior that you want to support. And we're going to actually see other built-in entity providers. Okay, so as I said, there are two options for creating a response. Option one is using built-in entity provider, and this is simpler. Okay, so in this case, entity providers apply mapping services, meaning marshalling, unmarshalling between representations such as XML or JSON and their associated Java type. So from a Java object, it will create XML or JSON. Okay. JAX-RS runtime comes with a built-in entity provider for XML, meaning it knows how to convert Java object to XML and how to convert XML to Java. Okay. However, for JSON, JAX-RS runtime does not have the built-in content handler or entity provider for JSON, so you have to add Jackson or Moxie, the dependency. Okay. And of course, you can create a custom entity provider and you can plug in. So that's option one, using built-in entity provider, okay, which is responsible for marshalling Java to XML or vice versa, or Java to JSON or vice versa. Okay. Option number two, if you want to have a very fine-grained control of creating a response, for example, you want to send back some custom response header. Then you are going to create a response yourself manually. Okay, so that's option number two. So let's take a look at option number one first. So here we are creating a response using built-in entity provider or content handler. So this is the code that you have seen before. Here we have get XML via entity provider method, which returns user object. And then we have a produces annotation that could generate XML or JSON. So you could handle both XML generation and JSON. Okay. So what it does is, what's important is that all you have to do is creating a Java object and then you return Java object. Okay. And underlying JAX-RS runtime will figure out how to convert this user object to XML or JSON. Okay, so in this case, it's using built-in entity provider. So entity provider will convert user object into XML or JSON. Okay, so this is option one. Now, when the Java object is being converted to XML or XML to Java, there is a little bit of instruction that you have to provide. Okay, that's basically what is called the JAX-B annotation. So let's talk about that. XML content handler via JAX-B. So as I said, JAX-RS runtime comes with a built-in JAX-B based entity provider. Okay, so this built-in the JAX-B based entity provider is responsible for marshalling, unmarshalling Java object into XML and vice versa. Now, it cannot just convert any Java object. It should be a Java object that is annotated with the JAX-B annotation, such as XML root element or XML type. Okay. Later on, you can also use a JAXB element type, but for now, don't worry about the second bullet here. We're going to mostly focus on JAXB annotations of XML root element and XML type. The reason these XML annotations are required is because even though JAXB entity provider is built in, it doesn't know how to create an XML from a just regular Java class. There has to be some instruction given by the developer to indicate, this is in fact the root of the XML, things like that. Okay. In terms of when we say XML, we are basically talking about different types of media type. For example, XML, application XML, text XML, application start XML. All these things are basically XML type. Okay, so this is an example. Suppose a client wants to receive the response data in the form of XML. So this code should have produces XML. Okay, and in this case, we basically return customer object, right? So what it means is that built-in JAXB-based entity provider will convert this customer object into XML. Okay, but you have to give some instruction to the converter. So in the customer class, you have to specify XML root element, meaning the name of the root element is customer. By the way, this is the name equal customer is probably not needed because the default is the name of the class. Okay, but if you want to use a different XML root element, maybe customer X, then you're going to actually have a name equal customer X. In that case, XML root element will be set as the customer X. Okay, in this case, this name equal customer is not needed because that's the default. Okay. You can also specify the attribute. So if you want to have ID field to be set as an attribute, then you can specify XML attribute. Otherwise, it's going to be sub element. Okay. And this one, XML element. So the first name is going to be XML element. Okay. And then you can specify the name of the sub element. In this case, first equal first dash name. The default is going to be first name. Okay. Without the dash. So in this case, if I want to have a different sub element name, in this case I have to specify name equal first name. If you want to just take the first name as the default root element, then this XML element is probably not needed. Okay, because that is the default. In this case, we need it because we want first dash name as the sub element name. So what gets generated is like this. So we have a customer as a root element, and ID field is set as an attribute, and then we have a first dash name field, and the rest of it is pretty much the same. Okay, so exercise 1, we are going to create a response using entity provider for XML and JSON. Okay, so this is exercise 1, so we're going to actually try response handling via entity provider. So let's run this guy. I'm going to import and okay, so this is the one, response handling via entity provider. Okay, so stop the previous running application and let's run this guy, run as Java application. Okay, so it's up and running, so we can actually see okay, so we are going to receive in the form of XML, and the next one is we are going to receive in the form of JSON. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's what we just did. Okay, and you can certainly use a call. Okay, and if you take a look at the code, so here we have get XML via entity provider method, and only thing we do is basically creating a user object and then return the user object as a response. So what it means is that built-in entity provider will be able to convert user object into XML. Same thing for JSON. So here we are producing JSON, right? Okay. So, and if you take a look at the user.java, you can see it is set with XML root element. Okay. Later on, you're going to have to do some experimentation. You're going to actually disable, you're going to actually remove this guy and see what happens. And you're going to actually experience an exception. Okay. This one, the XML type is proper order. So this is actually something that you can specify the order of the field. In Java, there is no concept of order of the fields, right? But in XML, it does. So if I want to generate an XML with name field first and age field next, then I can specify with the proper order. Or if I want to have age first before name, then I'm going to have age and name here. Okay, so this is to specify the order of the field in the generated XML. Okay. All right, so for your exercise, remove the JAXB annotation of user.java and rerun the application and see what happens. So let's actually try it together. So here I have if you take a look at the user.java, you can see, it is actually annotated with the XML root element, XML type. Okay, so I'm going to just comment this guy out. Okay. And then save the change, and then we're going to rerun the application, and let's see what happens. All right, so here (8080), and if I click XML, and the exception is expected. You can see internal server error 500. All right, and if you take a look at the exception in the here, actually I expected some exception, but yeah, okay. Looks like I don't see an exception here in the console. Okay, so basically the server application doesn't know how to convert the Java object in XML because it doesn't have any instruction. Okay, all right, so let's actually change it back. I'm gonna uncomment. Let's uncomment this guy and save the change and rerun. And now things should be working again. Okay, so you can see why this XML annotation, JAXB annotation, is important, because it gives an instruction to the entity provider in terms of how to create XML. Okay, all right, so let's just make sure it's running again. Okay, and 8080, and now it should work fine. Okay, but JSON, it doesn't matter, whether you actually annotate it or not. I should actually show that as well. So you can certainly try yourself. I mean, you can just comment this guy out, and JSON still should work fine. Okay. All right. So that is the exercise. That is exercise 1, and let's see for your own exercise. Okay. So yeah, this is something that I just demonstrated. I want you to actually try that yourself. Add a new domain class called the student, which has a string name and string school and int grade fields. And add a new class called the student resource, which contains methods that return responses that are created with a built-in entity provider. Basically, the only thing you have to do is just return student object. And of course, you have to annotate student class with the JAXB annotation. Okay. All right, the student, which returns method that return response that are created the built-in entity provider. Please remember that only the method is, so I don't know why this one should be removed. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you guys about the 10 minutes to do exercise 1.3. Okay, so let me just remove that. So if you actually go to the project and if you say Maven dependency tree, it will basically display all the dependencies that are configured in your project. So if you just grab like a Jackson, you can see it's actually using Jackson library. All right. However, if let's actually try to see whether you can use a JSON. So let's actually see if I can get the JSON Maven. So let's go to this guy. So I'm gonna just copy. Oops. I'm gonna just copy this guy, and then I'm going to. So what am I using here? So I'm using entity provider. So that's the project I'm working on. So here I'm gonna pom.xml file and pom.xml file. So I'm gonna just add, okay, and save. And so let's see this time, whether I'm let's see how it's configured. Okay, so let's do. Okay, still have it. So I'm gonna just Maven clean. Okay, and then let me just see whether I can actually do Jackson. Yeah, it looks like a Jackson is still configured. And let me see whether JSON is configured. Yeah, it is also actually configured. So yeah, I'm not sure actually which one is actually being used in this particular case. If you actually add a JSON, let's see. Yeah, looks like a Jackson has a lot more than the. So it does have annotation support, Jackson Core. And yeah, Jackson JXRS support. Yeah, so it seems it maybe it's actually more than just the JSON Java. So that's the reason it's still using Jackson. Okay, yeah. Okay, so things are done. So let's actually move forward. Let's yeah, I didn't actually pause it. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. JAX-B element. So when do you want to use JAX-B? So, in our previous case, we need to have an access to the source code to the domain classes, such as a user, so that we can add JAX-B annotation, right? However, there could be a situation where you do not have an access to domain class such as a user. It is maybe part of the third-party library. You just get the binary. You don't get the source code, right? So in that case, you have to use that user domain class object without actually having an access to it to change it, right? That's when you are going to use a JAX-B element, okay? So when domain class is not annotated with the JAX-B annotations and you don't have a source code to change it, then you can use JAX-B element with the genetic T type parameter. So here, basically we have a method, getXML via entity provider. We are going to use the JAX-B element. The return type in this case is going to be JAX-B and user genetic type. Okay, and in here, instead of returning user object, you are going to return JAX-B element. So you're going to say JAX-B element user genetic type, and here you specify qualified name of user, and then you specify the user object, class object, and then user object. So you basically provide instruction of how to convert user object into the XML in this code. Okay, because you don't have an access to the source code. Okay, so that is when you can use a JAX-B element. Okay, so let's take a look at the exercise 2, which is basically doing the same thing, but this time we are going to use JAX-B. Okay, so when you run the application, it should actually come up with the same thing. User.xml and user.json, it should actually return XML data. And when you see the code, this is what you're going to actually see. Okay, and if you take a look at user.java file, so let's actually take a look at the user.java file. So this is the JXP element. If you take a look at the user.java file, you can see it is in fact the commented out. Okay, just kind of the indicating that user class is not annotated with the JXP annotation. So in the resource class, we are basically returning JXP element object rather than user object. Okay, so it should work pretty much the same in terms of its behavior. Okay. All right, so make sure you did the homework of Spring response handling via entity provider, exercise 1, and remove the JXP annotation from a student class, and then use JXP element to return an XML response. So you can actually rewrite the code, assuming that you don't have an access to basically student domain class. So student domain class, you want to actually comment out that JXP annotations, and then you're going to use the JXP element. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to try exercise 2. Let's move on to the next topic. JSON content handler. So we just talked about the XML content handler. So now let's talk about JSON content handler. So JSON content handler is responsible for marshalling and unmarshalling JSON representations to and from Java object. As we talked about, there are two popular implementations of JSON entity provider, Jackson or Moxie. Okay. For JSON, domain class does not need to be annotated with JXP annotation. So JXP annotations is only for XML. Okay, so far we have learned option 1, where we are using built-in entity provider to create a response, which is simpler. Option 2, as we talked about, we are going to create the response object ourselves using response builder class. And the reason we do use this option 2 is when we want to have a fine-grained control in terms of creating a response. For example, if you need to add a custom response header, then this is the only option that you have. And it's a lot more flexible. So sometimes it's necessary to explicitly control the creation of response, as opposed to using built-in entity provider, as we have seen in the option 1. Okay. Reasons for creating your own response object is, for example, setting content type a field with your media type, setting location field, setting cache control field, setting e-tag field, setting last modified field. So whenever you need to customize a response header, then you are going to actually create it yourself using response builder. As I said, adding your custom header to the response, adding cookies to the response. So all these are examples of fine-grained control of creating a response. Yeah, so we're going to take a look at all these things later on. Cache control, e-tag, last modify. So these are relevant to caching. So we're going to actually see how we can actually set these things later on when you cover caching. Okay, so how you're going to create a response. So response object cannot be created directly. Instead, you're going to actually use what is called the response builder class. So the response builder is a builder pattern. Okay. So the steps to create your own response, basically you have to create a response builder object from response class. Okay, and then you are going to populate the response using response builder method. So again, this is a builder pattern. And you can actually in fact use what is called the fluent chain method. That is in fact from the builder pattern. And at the end, you're going to call build method of the response builder, which returns a response object, and that is what you are going to return. So let's see the code, or let's see actually step number 1. So this is how you are going to create response builder object from a response class. Okay. So response class has overloaded static method for creating response builder object. So here from a response class, you have a static method calling status, and you specify a particular status, and then it will return response builder object. or you can call OK method, or you can actually, yeah, it should be OK rather than OD, and you can specify the contents, the entity that you want to actually return, and you can also specify media type as well. And the last one is created with the URI location. So this method is used when you want to actually return 201 created. When the successful creation of a brand new item is done, then you can call created method by specifying URI location of newly created item, and then basically it returns create a response header, which is set with the 201 status, and also location response header is going to be set with this URI location. So you have a bunch of method that you can use to initialize a response builder object. Okay, so these are the examples. So you call status, and if you want to set 4, then you're going to actually specify the status, and then what gets back is the response builder. So this is OK method, and this is OK with the entity that is setting the response body with this customer data, and OK with the customer, and you can also set the media type and also create it. This is for again setting a 201 response status, as well as the location field is going to be set with this constructed URI. Okay, all right, so once you got the response build object, then you can actually call any of these methods. So if you see response builder class, it does have a lot of methods, and it returns response builder object as well. So you should be able to chain all these methods. So entity method is creating, entity method is used to set the entity of this guy to the body of the response. You can call the type method with the media type. You can set the locale language, location, setting the location response header. You can use a tag. This is actually setting an entity tag. Again, this is relevant to the caching, so we're going to talk about this tag and last modified thing method later on. Same thing with the cache control. And if you want to add a custom header, then you can use the header method. Okay, and key value pairs. And if you set the new cookie, then you're going to call the cookie method with the cookie object. And in fact, you could have a multiple cookie object here. So in this case, this is a simple example. So here we are going to create the response OK. So when you call OK method with this custom object, it does two things. One is setting a response to 200, and then it's going to set the body of the response with this custom object. And then once you got the response builder object, you can basically call any of these methods. So I can set the last modified field with a new date here object, and I can actually set the my customer the custom request header. So in this case, my header, and you set with the Sang Shin. And at the end, you can call build method, which returns a response object. Okay, here, and then that's what you want to return. Does this make sense? Does this step 1 and step 2 make sense? I mean, if you know builder pattern, it is not that difficult to understand these things. Any questions on this slide, step 1 and step 2? Okay, moving forward. And then, as I said, you're going to call the build method, which returns a response. Okay, and then if you take a look at the response builder, at the end, one of the method is in fact the build method, and it returns a response object. So once you got the response object, that's what you want to return for your method. Okay, so let's do exercise 3. So if you take a look at exercise 3, so we're going to create the response using response builder. Okay. So here we are going to actually run the handling via response builder, and then we're going to actually access it, user.xml, and you can see it does in fact return last modified data and also my custom header. Okay, and same thing with this guy, right? All right, so let's actually run this guy. So here, stop it, and we are going to response builder. So response handling via response builder. So let's run this application. Okay, so it's up and running. So now we should be able to call dash I. Yeah, you want to actually make sure having dash I. The dash I is basically you want to see the all response detail. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are actually call with the dash I. So here dash I, and then I'm going to receive user XML. I'm gonna just go over here. Okay, so you can see there is a last modified field, and it does also have a my custom header field. Okay, all right. So same thing with the JSON. So I'm going to receive the data in the form of JSON, and it does have the same thing, my custom header and last modified. So if you take a look at the code here, this is how you're going to create the response object. So instead of returning a user object, you're going to return response object. Okay, and here we are creating a response object, okay, calling OK method. So it is setting the status to 200, and again each of this method will return response builder object. So we should be able to actually call any method of the response builder. So in this case, entity user, so I'm actually using user object to set the body of the response. Here I'm actually setting XML, the format. Okay, so basically I'm actually setting content type to XML. So you can see content type should be set the XML, and JSON in this case is a JSON, right? Okay, and I'm also setting the last modified with a date object. And I also added my custom header with the jpassion.com, and at the end I called build, and then that will return response object, and I return that. Okay, so that is for generating XML, and here we are generating JSON. The only difference is that we are setting media type to application.json, application_JSON. Okay, all right. For your own exercise, in the student resource class you created above, add a method in which response is created via response builder class. Okay, and optional exercise, get the current request URI and set the location field to the response with it. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys about 10 minutes to do exercise 3. Next topic is building URIs with URI builder and URI info classes. So we have seen how we can inject URI info using context annotation in our previous example, right? So the reason JAX-RS provides these utility classes are basically, in order to create the URI, you need the these utility classes. Okay. Okay. So maybe I should actually use this slide. URI builder class is for building URIs, and building them is not easy with, before URI builder class, we have what is called the java.net URI, but, just using this class is not that easy to create a URI, right? So that's the reason we have a URI builder class as part of the JAX-RS, okay? So it will make the job of creating URI simpler. URI info class is providing base URI information. Again, we have seen example of URI info object being injected using context annotation, right? So URIs that will be returned are typically built from the base URI. The REST service is deployed at or from the request URI. Okay, so let's see an example. So as we learned before, URI object could be injected using context annotation. Okay, and then when you need to create a URI, right, what you can do is you're gonna actually call get request URI method of the URI info. So this will return URI info. The request URI. Okay, and then you can actually create a URI builder object by calling from URI. So you're gonna actually start from this guy. And URI builder object, and then you can actually call path method, and then you can actually specify some kind of variable like curly and ID. Okay, and then when you create a response object, you can specify URI builder.build. Again, this is the builder pattern, and then this object is actually being used to specify the actual value of this variable. Okay, so what gets created is something like this. I mean, this get request URI is going to be maybe up to this point. It will return http colon localhost 8080 slash resources slash customers, right? And then it will actually add ID variable, and then when you actually call the build method and you specify the actual value of this ID, so if the value happen to be 4, and it will actually create this URI. Okay, so when you call the created method, it will set the response value to a status to 201, and you can specify the newly created items URI, and that will be used to set the location response field with this guy. So that's that's when you want to actually use this request URI builder class from URI info. So it will actually set the URI of newly created item. In this case, happen to be 4. Does this make sense? Okay. All right. If you happen to have another variable, you can just have another one. URI path. Then the comma and then curly brace XYZ, and then here when you actually pass the ID and you can specify comma, and then if you actually provide another value, that second value will be used to set the second the variable. Okay. Okay, this is another example. Oh, so this is the case that we are building a URI that contains request parameters. Suppose this is how this is the request parameters that I want to create, construct. Okay, so I have the resources slash customers question mark and start equal to and size equal 3. So this is what I want to create. Okay, so in this case, from URI context object, so I'm using context annotation to get the URI info object, and then I get the absolute path builder. So that's basically up to this point, the blue colored URI fragment. So that's what the blue colored code is gonna be used to create that blue fragment, right? And then you can call query param method to specify key value pair. Okay. All right, so the this is how you're gonna actually create the request parameters. Okay. Okay, so let's do exercise 4. So here we are going to so when you run the application, we're gonna actually try to get the first item, and then this the form will be used to create a brand new item. Okay. So it will create so this is going to, this one is the first item, and then so it should actually return 200. Okay, and then you're going to create the brand new one, so sang and age 100 or whatever, add user. It will return the response like this. Okay. So this is gonna actually so this is for get, right, and this is a post. So this is where we are gonna actually use the URI builder from URI info object, and then this is the index, and in this case, when the brand new user is in fact created, we are gonna get the ID. So this one should be true, maybe, right? So the when you are actually calling this guy, it should return so we can certainly actually have this system out println statement in the server side to get the information in a different way. So get request URI, get base URI, get path. So you can actually replace the get request URI using get base URI and get path. Okay, so it's a combination of these two is actually doing the same thing of this guy. All right. So yeah, all right. So let's actually run this application. So this is the curly. So yeah, this is URI builder and URI info. Okay. Stop URI builder and URI info. Run as and Java application. Okay, it's up and running. So Okay, so this is a build, the first user 1 should actually return, it just returns URI. Okay, and here I'm going to actually call JPassion, age is 66, add user. Okay, so it just, add the user. So, basically if I actually do 2, maybe, yeah, so that is the, it just returned, in this case, just returns 2. Okay. And actually what I want to actually show is that, response, let's actually try to do response here. So I'm going to actually have the developer tools. If you press the F12, you can actually see the actual responses, right? So this time I'm going to have JPassion 2, age is 666. I don't like the number, 777. Okay, and we should be able to select the network. And when you add a user, we want to actually see the response. So select user here, and you can see, status code is 201, and that's the actual response. And if you take a look at the response header, we should actually see the location response header is set to this guy, right? Users 1. Okay. That is interesting. Actually, I expected expected this one to be 2, but it looks like our logic is not really actually, the adding it. It's just kind of replace it. It seems like. Okay. But what's important is that the location field is set the URI of the newly created item. Okay. All right. So that is exercise 4. Okay. All right. So yeah. So this is basically get ID and post ID. The other new user ID. Oh, yes, actually increment. We are supposed to increment. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we don't have any user. So this is probably the 1. So if you actually add another one, then ID. The reason is because this is not really static. Okay. In basically what happens is that whenever a new request comes in, this object gets recreated. So that's the reason it's always starting from 1. So let's actually try to change this guy. So instead of URI here, I'm going to in fact use resource here. I'm going to actually make it this one as a static, so that static. Okay, so that the counter is actually being incremented. Okay, save the change and let's run the application. Okay, now okay, so let's make sure this time I'm gonna have Sang 1, 11, and add user. Okay, so add it. Oh, ID is 1. Okay, so let's see if I add Sang 2, 111, add user. Yeah, so it's actually now incrementing to 2 because we actually set the counter to be static. Okay, so whenever whenever I added a brand new user, it's just adding so 3 and add user. Now it should be 3. Okay, before that, because a new object gets created brand new, meaning this user resource object gets created each time request comes in. This atomic integer is actually always starting from 0. So the value you got is 1. That's why. Okay. Okay, so that is let's actually what exercise we want to do. So here so add the following code, the get user method, and observe the output in the console. So just kind of verify what's happening on the server side using system out println. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys about 5 minutes to try exercise 4. Next topic is creating response for creation in CRUD operations. So when you're adding new item, how you're gonna actually create a response. And we already talked about this one already. So HTTP response for HTTP post for creating a brand new resource. There are two things that need to be done. The response status code should be 201 created. And then the location response header should be set to the URI of the newly created item. Okay, so that's something that we actually kind of play around in our previous exercise already. So this is what's supposed to happen. So when you are creating a brand new item, you are using post, and the content type is XML, and then you're basically adding this item dog to the items. So that is basically the URL here. And when it has been successfully added, the response should be 201 created, and the location field should be set to the URI of the newly created item. So that's basically what needs to happen. So what you have to do in your code is that if you're actually using option 2 of generating a response, so here, basically you have to create the URI of the newly created item. So I'm going to just capture as the created URI, and then you're going to call the created method and specifying the created URI, and then call build, and then that is going to contain the 201 response code, and also it will set the location response header with in this case created URI. Okay. All right, so that is exercise 5. So let's take a look at the exercise 5. So entity provider, and so in this case when you created it, and so this is basically what we have done before as well. So nothing really new, and basically the status code is supposed to be 201, and location field is supposed to be set with the new URI. Okay, so this is so here we created from a URI info get request URI, and you got the request builder object, and we are calling path of ID here, and then we call the created method of response builder class, and the response class, and then we are just using so when you call the build with the user ID, and this user ID value is going to be from here, and that is going to be used to set this ID. And in terms of entity, you could actually specify, you could actually add some string value here. Okay. All right, so for your exercise, add the student method to the student resource you created in exercise 1.3 above, and make sure it returns to one response code, and set the location response header. You know what? I'm going to actually finish up the presentation, and then I'm going to actually let you guys do the lab. Other built-in entity providers. So entity providers apply mapping services between representations such as XML or JSON to their Java object. Okay, so entity providers come in two flavors. One is for reading, and the other one is for writing. So it is message bodied reader and message bodied writer. So message bodied reader, by the way, these are interfaces, so there could be actually implementation of this interface. Basically, implementation of message bodied reader defines a contract between JAX-RS runtime and components that provide the mapping services from the representation to Java type. So it's message bodied reader is used to convert XML or JSON to Java, and message bodied writer is the other direction. Okay. So these are built-in entity providers. Okay, so JAX-RS runtime includes prepackaged message bodied reader and message bodied writer implementations for the following Java and media type combinations. Okay, so what's actually useful is basically the JAX-B element, and applications apply JAX-B classes, and also we have XML transformation and data source. Okay. So as long as you're using these data types, there are built-in entity providers which are in the form of message reader and message bodied reader and message bodied writer, and you don't have to actually do anything else. Okay. other built-in entity providers. So let's actually see exercise 6. So basically, again, you're going to, assuming that you have a test files already, then you don't have to do this, okay? In this case, we are just return file object. So click file 1 and so basically file 1 is returning image. And here, basically, we are going to, this is kind of same thing here. We have seen before, okay? So, we actually create the response builder object from the file object, okay? And we are producing PNG file, okay? And let's see if we try your own image file. Okay, so I mean, in this case, the point is that the idea is that there is actually a built-in converter for PNG. So that's the point. So let's actually see. Oh, not this one, Spring Boot. The one I want to actually see. This one is the byte media type input stream. Yeah, the file. Yeah, so this is basically I was looking for. So when you have a file object, then there is a built-in entity provider that actually convert that file into XML or JSON, or in this case, PNG file. Okay. All right, so that's the end of the presentation and the lab. So we have 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna let you guys I'm gonna let you do exercise 5 and 6, and then we are going to call it a day. I'm actually reasonably happy in terms of what we have done today. So let me just take a look at the what we have done here. Let's take a look at the REST program in JXRS. So we covered 6 topics: REST introduction, REST design, resource matching, it should be actually matching, and injection annotation, content negotiation, and response generation. So we cover 6 topics. Tomorrow we're going to actually move on to REST client, and then we're going to work on caching, and then HATOAS, and we'll do best practices where we are going to cover versioning and then security. So I think that is probably enough topics for tomorrow, but tomorrow's topic is actually a lot more interesting than today's. Okay. All right, so I'm going to